So for those of you that just joined us, you are in the Hope and the Hard Road presentation for SSI Supports. And actually, it's a little bit of an expanded presentation tonight. We have Attorney Wendy Dumlao here to present, and we are so excited about it. Wendy's amazing. She comes back time and time again, and we are so blessed to have her. So Wendy's been an attorney for almost 17 years practicing disability law, and is an incredible advocate for families of children with special needs and those with disability. She worked for 5 years as the client's rights advocate in San Diego, which is a program you guys should definitely know about, before opening her own practice specializing in advocacy related to regional center services, Social Security, Medi-Cal, IHSS, and Special Education. So she has a lot of great insights, you guys, and we cannot wait for her to start talking about this resource. So we're going to let Wendy go ahead and get started.
All right, let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay, can you see that? Is that good? All right. So we're going to talk about Social Security benefits, but we're going to focus mainly on SSI, and then we'll talk a little bit about SSDI. So SSI is, let me see, make sure this works. SSI is it stands for Supplemental Security Income, and SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance.
Sorry, I don't know if it's
And so SSI is not an entitlement program. The difference between it and SSDI is SSDI is, but SSDI is sort of, that's the umbrella terminology I use. You might hear people say SSA benefits, but that's not technically the correct terminology. It's SSDI, and that's survivor benefits, retirement benefits, or Social Security disability insurance. There's a couple ways somebody can get SSDI. Mainly for this presentation, we're talking about individuals with disabilities, and we're talking about usually children, right? And I'll get into what benefits are available for people who are over 18. But I'm going to focus mainly first on minors, so people 18 and under, and then we'll talk about over 18. So for SSDI, the difference would be they look at resources, which is like your savings and what you have in your bank accounts that just sits there, and pensions and things like that. So does SSI. Sorry, SSDI looks at income. They do not look at resources. Sorry, I'm not feeling well. They look at income. So they're looking at wages, like what is this person earning? They do not look at unearned income. They only look at wages. They also do not look at resources. So you could have $1 million in savings and you could still be eligible for SSDI because it's an entitlement program. Somebody paid into the program because they worked. So that's what makes it an entitlement program. SSI is different in that they look at your resources and your income. They look at earned income, unearned income, which might be like child support or other benefits you're getting. And they also look at your resources. So what's in your bank accounts, pensions, retirement funds, whatever. And it's a low income benefit. So for both programs, you have to prove you're disabled and you meet their disability criteria. But the way they look at resources and income are a little different. Also for SSI, they look at parental deeming, which looks at your parents' income and your parents' resources if you are a minor. Once somebody's 18, they don't look at your parents' income or resources anymore. They only look at yours. So if you're getting, let's say you're 19, you're a disabled 19-year-old child, and one of your parents are separated, one of them is giving you child support, they will look at that as unearned income, but they won't look at what your parent is making through wages. They'll also look at this at the adult person's wages if they're working, but a lot of people are not working. And we'll talk about what that calculation looks like if somebody's working. Okay, so those are the differences between the two programs we're going to talk about. And then the other thing to remember is There's a deeming calculation that we're going to go over. So when I use the word deeming, I'm talking about when someone's a minor. So their parents' income or resources is going to get, to some extent, used against the minor child in determining whether they're eligible for benefits. So there's two ways you're eligible. The first is disability wise. So do you meet the disability criteria? The second for SSI is, do you meet the income and resource criteria? So let me stop sharing this and pull up a deeming example so I could sort of explain and walk you through it for a minor child. And this is just a deeming calculation for like income, wages. They also deem your parents' resources. So resources are your savings. And we'll talk about that after I go through this deeming example, okay? So let me share this with you because I did a calculation. I sort of broke out a calculation for you guys so you can visually see the example. And this example is actually pulled directly from Social Security's website in their program and operations manual. So this is what they give to their staff who are like working up cases. They give them this as training. And it is correct because I looked at it. The only thing I want you to remember is that on this, the federal benefit rate is not correct. But I didn't want to have to go in and change it all. So I just continued to use 674, which is an old federal benefit rate. And you'll see like right here, it's highlighted because the new federal benefit rate is 934. But this at least gives you an example of how they do the calculation. And up here, I give you sort of the facts of this family so you know what this is based off of. And I think you guys will share this with them, right? Yeah, okay. All right, so here, let's go through the facts real quick of the family, and then I'll walk you guys through the calculation. And it's a little confusing, but this is to help you if you want to figure this out yourself. So what I was thinking was on this side, you could plug in your own information and do the math that way. So Clifford Day or Mr. Day, that's the parent. He's 65. He has two children, Tom and John. Tom is eligible for SSI benefits. John is not eligible. Okay, so there's two kids. There's what we call an eligible child and there's what we call an ineligible child. And that matters because there's money that is subtracted to account for the ineligible child. And we'll get to that part. And then it looks at unearned income, which could be benefits or retirement or a pension, like payment out of those. And it also looks at Mr. Day's earned income, which is wages, okay? Like what he's from his employment. So his unearned income is 380. And there's always an automatic exclusion given for any unearned income of $20. So this is just like a freebie that Social Security gives you. So I highlighted the things that are sort of automatic. So you take 20 out of that, you have 360, sort of set that aside for right now. Then you look at earned income, Mr. Day's earned income. It's 975. Then Social Security gives you this freebie of $65. So they don't count $65 of that. And this is what's left, okay? From the earned income, they only count half of it against you. So then you divide it by 2, which is this, and you end up with 455 of countable earned income. So both of those are put together. They did it different here, but I always just add them together. Here, they took the unearned income and determined when they reduced that by the federal benefit rate, there's 141 that's in excess, okay? The federal benefit rate used here is 674. So, oh, they did add them together, I'm sorry. Here's where they're added together, 815. That's the unearned and the earned that's left. Then we look at the federal benefit rate. And they do this to determine if the parent is eligible too. And because the income added together is more than the federal benefit rate, Mr. Day is not eligible, all right? That doesn't mean his children are not eligible though. Now we have to decide how much of that is counted against the eligible child. So you take the federal benefit rate and you subtract it from the added income. And that leaves 141 is what the excess is. Then this is where it gets a little tricky, and you don't have to do it this way, but I'll walk you through it anyways. John has his own income and he's not an eligible child, because sometimes there's other children in the homes that are not eligible for SSI because they're not disabled. So we have to consider them. But John has some income of 290. The ineligible child allocation is 337. All right. But he has some earned income. So Social Security is only going to count what's left from that. So they take the 337, which is an automatic. We have one kid that's not eligible. We're going to give you 337 for that kid, because you should be able to have some money every month for that child, which this kind of tells you what Social Security thinks about how much children cost, because they only give you 337 a month per ineligible child. And what I mean by they give it to you, they're not necessarily giving it to you. They're saying, we'll let you keep 337. But because John has income, they're only allowing $47. That's the difference between these two. All right. So the income that's deemed to Tom, which is the ineligible child, is this excess minus the 47 for the ineligible child, $94. That also gets a general income exclusion. So we take that $20 off of that. And then the only amount of income that is counted against Tom is $74. So you take the federal benefit rate for an individual, you minus out the $74 that's deemed against Tom, and you're left with $600. That's the SSI payment to Tom. I know it's very complex. This is the math we do in our office to determine if somebody is eligible under income, because we do have families call and they say, I know they're eligible based on their disability, but we just don't know if they're eligible based on our income. We will ask you for all these numbers because this is how we're going to do the calculation. But you can also try to do it yourself if you can figure it out. But I do give you this to sort of show you like how they come up with this. This is just based on wages, okay? Let me stop sharing because you'll get a copy of this. And we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So that's the deeming example for income. When they're determining how much resources they're going to deem to a minor, they're looking at, is there two parents in the home or one? If there's two, then it's the resource amount for a couple, which is 4,000. So you could have 4,000 plus 2,000 for every eligible child. So let's say there's two children in the home that are eligible, then you can have 8,000 in resources. So it really depends on the people that are in the home. They first count whether there's two parents, then they count if there's eligible children in the home. So let's say there's a two-parent household and one eligible child, you can have 6,000 in resources. So what do you do if you have more than that? Well, you're not eligible. So if your parents have more than that, you're not eligible, unfortunately, for SSI. You might be eligible for SSDI. We'll talk about that next. But what a lot of families do is they wait until the individual's 18 and they apply then, because nothing counts against the individual. And when they turn 18, depending on what that individual's resources are, you do a special needs trust or a Cal Able account, which is not a part of this presentation, but those are two ways to keep resources and keep them for that individual who's disabled without them counting against them so they can have SSI. And there are attorneys that do this. My office does not, but there are attorneys that help with CalAble accounts and special needs trusts. Okay, so for SSDI, this is that entitlement program. An individual with a disability needs to show that they had a disability prior to 22. Their parent has to be retired or of full retirement age, even though they're not accepting retirement, okay? And they can be eligible for SSDI under their parent's Social Security number. It doesn't change the retirement benefit that the parent will receive. The other way is if the parent is considered disabled by Social Security, their child can get a benefit as long as they're shown to be disabled prior to 22. This program is not as restrictive. And there's a few ways it's not as restrictive, but the first one is it doesn't matter what your resources are. You can have all these trusts that are not special needs trusts. Like I said, you can have $1 million in savings. It doesn't matter. The only thing they look at is how much are you working and what's your income from your wages. So it's a really great program. The other thing about this, which is really important, is that SSI, and I may not have said this, and I think it was probably in the prior slide, can only be used for rent, food, and clothing. So they're very strict about how it's used. They don't really care about clothing, but they want you to be able to prove it's being used on rent and food. And what I mean by that is they're not like looking at receipts, but they want to know how much you're spending on both of those things. And then we'll talk about what happens if you're not able to meet the rent and food clothing costs with the SSI. Like, it's just such a game, but we'll talk about that at the end. So with SSDI, what I recommend usually is if you're not eligible for that yet, because your parent is not retired or of full retirement age, you apply for SSI, even if you're only going to get $1. Because once you're determined disabled medically, it's so much easier for my office to get you into SSDI because that you've already proven you're eligible for Social Security benefits medically. And sometimes when you have a good worker, they just automatically transition you into SSDI. You get a letter that says you're now eligible for this higher benefit because your parent is of full retirement age. So I think it's just a good strategy if you can. Some people cannot, but if they can, it's a good strategy. So the other thing that is important to look at with SSDI, and this is for individuals who are working and they're working quite a bit, you need to be careful about what that person's making. And this is based off what they're making prior to taxes taken out. It's not after taxes are taken out. So you always want to look at what their income is prior to taxes. There's a very low threshold, and there's a couple things that happen that will eventually kick you off SSDI benefits. The first is called a trial work period. And I don't have enough time to go into all of that, but what you need to know is I think the amount is like 934. It's like 900 something, or it was. If you make that or more for 9 months, and they do not have to be consecutive, you're kicked into what's called extended period of eligibility. Now, if you make SGA, which used to be 1435, not sure what it is this year, you can Google it and look it up. Social Security doesn't have it on their website easily available, so I always just Google it. It's easier to find, which is so weird, but kicks you into extended period of eligibility, where if you make SGA, they look at it for 36 months. In that 36 months, if you make SGA, you can be kicked off benefits. So it's tricky and complex. And if you have someone on SSDI, we can give you advice on how to handle that. But what I would really say is if you get kicked into EPE or extended period of eligibility, you make sure they never make SGA unless you don't want them to be on benefits anymore. And then the other little thing I have here, expedited reinstatement of benefits. If someone is kicked off benefits because they've made SGA in that 36 month or whatever, there is a process to get them back on benefits, but you have to do it pretty quickly. And there's a Social Security has a form, and you just have to prove they're no longer making SGA. And that was like a fluke, or it only happened for a couple months and it's not happening anymore. And they'll usually reinstate them. People don't know about this, and they don't know about the form. So they do the regular appeal, and then it takes like a year to get an answer. But this can get it resolved within like 2 months. So this is really important. Later in the slides, I give you the website for the forms, and you can go on their forms page and you can search extended or expedited reinstatement for SSDI, and it'll pop up. Sorry, my throat is like, okay. Okay, so when you're applying, right, all the forms are online, but you cannot do an online application for SSI. And I have no idea why. It's such a pain in the butt, but you can't. So you can do SSDI, and there's a box you check in that application that says, I want to also apply for SSI. And don't miss that box, because then they have to send you the forms for the SSI application. So if you struggle to find those forms, just do the SSDI benefit, even though you know they're not going to be eligible. Check the box for the SSI application, or that you want to apply for SSI, and then they'll send you the forms. Or call someone's office like mine, and we'll give you the forms, because we've saved them, and they're the forms we always use when we help people apply. When you apply, if you think you're sending in too much information, you're not. So just send it all in. And if you have a concern about a document that might interfere with eligibility, then get advice before you send it in. But if somebody has pretty significant autism, as an example, I would send it all in. I would send in the first assessment, the IEPs, the triennials, the regional center stuff. We usually send it all in. And I think it helps. The other thing you want to do when you're applying for SSI is for 18 and older, because when they're minors, they automatically reduce the benefit. When they're 18 and older, they can get the maximum benefit if you can prove that they are able to cover their own rent and food at fair market value, which depends where you live, or it depends on what your mortgage is, or it depends on what your rent is. And so what we advise people to do is do rental agreements if they're living in their parents' home that say, my parents and I so-and-so agree that my parents are covering my rent and food until I become eligible for SSI. And then the expectation is that my retroactive benefits will repay them. And my rent is this much and my food is this much. And if your SSI won't cover it, some people have a CalAble account or a special needs trust, and then they put some language that the excess will be covered by that CalAble account or by that special needs trust. And it's important to do that because Social Security has this backwards rule for SSI that if you can't prove that the benefit or the benefit plus your CalAble account is covering your rent and food, they're going to give you less SSI, which makes zero sense, but that is legally the rule. It's very weird. So just get advice on that before you submit all your paperwork, because you want that to be in there. And we can talk about this a little later. If you don't do it with your application, well, even when you do it with your application, they miss it sometimes, but then they don't give you the correct retroactive benefits. So they might change it later and give you the full benefit, but then you're fighting them for the full benefit in your retroactive benefit. So yeah, it's a lot. And it really depends on what worker you get to. Always send in, if you have a special needs trust or a CalAble account, send in the CalAble account like bank statement, or send in your special needs trust so that doesn't hold things up. Okay, so there's a couple different appeals with SSI benefits or SSDI benefits. The first thing that can happen is an overpayment with these benefits. With things like Medi-Cal or Regional Center or IHSS, they might threaten an overpayment, but they don't actually pursue overpayments. Social Security does, and sometimes they do it 5 years down the road, and you're shocked. So please always report changes in income. Do not think you will not get caught, because you will, and it could be a long ways down the road, and it'll be like $100,000. So it becomes a mess trying to do a waiver or reconsideration of those things when it's that far gone. So the first thing that you can do, and you can file at any time, I'm not sure why this says 30 days, but you can do it at any time, is a waiver. A waiver says, this overpayment is not my fault, you're wrong. You can do it at any time, it doesn't matter. A reconsideration must be done within 60 days. We tell everyone 60, even though you technically have 65, because we don't want you to miss your timeline. Sometimes that 5 extra days gets your appeal there if you're mailing it, but they give you an extra 5 days for mailing. But I always just tell people, just think of it, it's due in 60 days. They have to have it in 60 days. And sometimes you can do some of these online, and sometimes it won't let you. So don't wait till the 59th day to look online and see if you can do it. The overpayment, I'm sorry, I switched these. The overpayment says, the reconsideration says, it's not my fault. The overpayment says, it might be my fault, maybe it's not, but I shouldn't have to pay it back. Like, I'm low income, you didn't give me all the rules, I reported this to you and you didn't track it, it's your fault, not mine, right? Those are all the arguments for an overpayment. And in the beginning, when they were talking about my bio and they said I was the client's rights advocate for disability rights, Disability Rights California has so many publications on their website, and they will give you these forms and they will talk you through the difference between a waiver and a reconsideration. They have very parent-friendly publications, so you can go into their publications and search this stuff if you just need like a little bit of advice on how to get it done. Here's the forms section for Social Security, and you can go there and search the forms. But I also give you the form names here in case you just want to Google them, because Social Security's website is not easy to navigate. So that's an overpayment. Nobody wants to get that. Just make sure you're reporting your stuff, and make sure you're keeping track that you're reporting your stuff, because that's what's going to get you out of this when the worker messes up your case, which happens a lot. The other appeal is if you've been denied because they don't think you medically meet the criteria, okay? We call that a medical appeal, and the forms are different for that. The first thing you have to do, it used to be in California, you could do, a reconsideration or just go directly to a hearing with an ALJ. You cannot do that anymore. There were cases where we used to be able to just like scoot past the reconsideration because we knew it wasn't going to get approved. They don't allow that anymore. It's probably just to slow things down for the judges who have so many cases, but you have to do the reconsideration first, and the same appeal timeline, 60 days, 5 days for mailing, so 65, but you really want to do it within 60. There's a couple different things you can choose. You can choose for them to do a file review, which they just have somebody else look at the file or whatever else you send in with your reconsideration. They can look at the informal, or you can check informal conference where somebody else will meet with you, or you can request a formal conference where somebody in a supervisory position and your attorney or whoever can all meet and go over like new evidence or the case. We always just check file review and send in more information, because a lot of times it just gets denied anyways. So we want to just move through the process and get to the ALJ. And usually they want you to give them all this information within 10 days of your appeal that you submitted. So I always say submit it together if you can, so it doesn't get lost, because that's the other thing that Social Security is notorious for, is losing documentation. So you always want to send stuff certified return receipt. We've made some mistakes in our office not doing that, and it's really been not good. So just pay the extra for it, because it really will help you when they say they didn't get it. It can take between, this is still correct, 2 to 6 months to get an answer, unless you have a really horrible worker who just has their desk piling up. If that gets denied, then you then have 60 days to appeal that by asking for a hearing with an ALJ. So that is a different form. And I give you the link right here to those forms, those disability appeal forms. This will be a hearing in front of an administrative law judge, and you can submit, they'll give you like a scan bar, if you have an authorized representative or an attorney, they'll get access online. You can submit additional evidence, and then someone can come with you to the hearing. They're in person usually now. They were telephonic for a while, and I think they're doing like half and half now, but you can request in person now, and you can appeal it that way. Okay. So preparing for hearing, just know that it can take, now I would say 6 months to 18 months. The judges their caseloads are really high. And I think people who are requesting in-person hearings are being seen quicker, but it's just taking a really long time. And I do recommend that you're represented for this by somebody who understands these hearings, because they move very quickly. The judges want you in and out in an hour. They have vocational experts, and the way the judge asks them questions is confusing. And if you don't have an attorney who does this on a regular basis, they're not going to know what's being asked. Yeah, so I think it's helpful to be represented. And honestly, at least our office does this, and I think most attorneys who do these cases do this. We do a contingency. So you're not paying attorney's fees unless we win. And our fees cap out at $6,000. So if your retro benefits are, 30, 40, 50, you're only going to be missing $6,000 to pay your attorney. So it's definitely worth it. This is important because this will help you when you're doing your application. So the blue book, this is the link for Social Security's blue book. This is how they determine if you meet their criteria under certain disabilities. And they have a ton of disabilities listed. And if you can give them evidence that shows your child or yourself meet these disability criteria, usually you're approved. So Part A is for adults and Part B is for children. The only difference really is maybe the age, but also Part A looks at how this affects someone's ability to be employed. Part B looks at how it affects their ability to live independently, because they're children. We're not looking at whether they can be employed. So sometimes Part B, you're able to meet it a little easier if you can show they're struggling in school and they're struggling in their home life. What's good evidence? Like I said, review the listing, because it will tell you. And you want the most evidence possible from multiple sources. This is if you're applying or even if you're going to hearing. IEPs, IPPs, ISPs, IPEs, which are from Department of Rehab. Those are for adults. Letters that just give a conclusion that the person can't work is not good enough. And assessments are important. X-rays if there's a physical disability. Blood tests if there's something going on diabetes-wise. You want medical sources. Letters are good if the person writing it talks about their history with the client or the individual, their background and training and why the person would not be able to work. Okay, so letters are okay as long as it has all that information. And if you need to appeal your hearing from an ALJ, you first have to request the appeal through the appeals council, and then you can go to federal court. And you can go on Social Security's website. It will tell you what you need to prove to do these appeals, or if you want them to be successful. And your decision you get, the first couple pages will tell you the timeline on when these have to be completed. I don't remember them off the top of my head. Okay, other topics. So child support, it can be included in a deeming calculation. And what they're going to do is they're going to look at if the parent is an absent parent or not, and that's how they're going to count it against the kid. So this will be considered unearned income for the individual that's looking to get SSI. And if there's an absent parent, which just means they don't live in the home, it doesn't mean that they're not seeing their child. It means like they don't pay for anything and they're not living in the home. They only count a third of the child support amount. If they're not an absent parent, they count 2/3. So that is considered in that deeming calculation. And then if you are over resources, the parents are over resources, there's a couple of things you can look at to try to, I guess, defend yourself and say you're not over resources. There are things you can be saving for, and there's a list. Social Security has a list. And then if a parent is self-employed, you can put some things over and say there's for self-employment or for your business, and it doesn't count as a resource. Sometimes people are still over resources, but those are some tricks you can do. And Social Security tells you, they have lists of like what those things are. And then the only other thing, I think we talked about the rental agreements, but the only other thing is what we call IRWEs. And those are impairment related work expenses. So sometimes people who are working and Social Security has determined they're not eligible for SSDI anymore because they've been over the income threshold. They didn't count their impairment related work expenses, which are things like transportation costs. Maybe they buy their lunch where they work because they're not able to cook because of their disability. Maybe they take medication and pay out of pocket for that. Maybe they have a service dog. Maybe they have a caregiver their parents are paying, or you know what I mean? Or it's coming out of their SSI to make sure they get up and get ready for work. Those are all what we call IRWEs, and those are subtracted from the income before the income is counted against the person. And then it's important to remember, then that leftover income, they still only count half. Okay, I don't know if I missed anything. Oh, a couple more slides. So San Diego's hearing office is called San Diego ODAR. It's different in every county, but in San Diego, it's San Diego ODAR. And this is the address. It's downtown San Diego. And this is their phone number. The guy that answers the phone's name is June. He's really nice. So if you have any questions, call him. He can't always help, but he'll at least give you information. I talked a little bit about the POMS. This is Program and Operations Manual. This is what Social Security gives to their workers to do certain things. This is how you're going to run a deeming calculation on this scenario. This is what doesn't count as a resource for self-employment. This is, these are the things that are exceptions to counting as resources. So you go there and then it's outlined in like supplemental security income, SSDI, they have categories. Then you click on that link and then it has all these names of like every subject you could research. So you could like go down the rabbit hole, but if you're interested in researching this stuff or you have questions, you could go there. This is regulations, and parents probably don't want to look at that stuff, but that's the other link we look at when we're looking at like appealing stuff. And then representation forms usually need a 1696 and a 1695 and a retainer agreement. I'm just telling you this because if your attorney sends this to you, that's why we have to have this stuff for Social Security, or they won't consider us a representative. And then we'll miss notices that are important. And then here is our contact information. So this is our direct line. Usually Jennifer doesn't normally answer it, but she will call you back, and it takes a couple days, but she will call you back. Jennifer's my office manager. It's just her and I. So be patient if you call. And then this is her email. She does all the intake. So if you do want assistance, you have to go through her first, because she wants to vet it because she wants to make sure we can actually help you. So you're not waiting on the calendar and then me tell you, hey, sorry, I know you've waited 2 weeks, but I can't help you with that. So she talks to you, gets information, asks me if it's something that we can review, and then she'll get documents from you, and then she'll get you on my calendar. And then this is my email.